Hi there, this is Justin Taylor. You may know me from some of the other podcasts that I host. I also do a Brian's Back podcast based on Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys from 1974 to 1978, which is based upon my book that I had been working on. And I also am part of the Good Time podcast, which is a Beach Boys podcast where we talk about basically anything and everything the Beach Boys. Now, this channel, I specifically wanted to focus in on different albums other than the Beach Boys. I have a wide variety of different music that I do listen to, and I wanted to kind of take the time and go through each album that's in my collection and to kind of share it with you and some of my thoughts and my review of the specific album. And I'm also going to give you a little bit of history as well behind the album. And we're going to go back in time and kind of look at some of the articles and what band members had to say at the time about specific projects. So this will be really interesting to go through this. And the first record that I wanted to do this week for episode 1 is Midnight Star, No Parking on the Dance Floor. So this record was kind of a big hit back then in 1983 when it first came out. This came out on the Solar label, which was a smaller label, I guess you could say. It was really popular for R&B. Lakeside, the Whispers were kind of like the major acts at the time on this label. It's actually Sound of Los Angeles Records. That's what Solar Records stands for. And it was released on June 6th, 1983 on Solar Records. This is probably the most successful of all the Midnight Star albums because it does have so many hits on it. Especially the first hit, Freakazoid, was such a huge hit that it just blew up this album completely. It eventually reached number 27 on the Billboard Pop Albums chart in 1983-84, and number 2 on the Billboard Top Soul Albums chart. So it was a very popular album. 3 singles were released from this album. Freakazoid, which was the first one, it was on May 15th, 1983, reached number 66 in the US, number 2 R&B, and number 44 US dance. And then the second single was a song called Wet My Whistle, number 61 US, number 8 R&B, and number 15 US dance. And that was on August 3rd, 1983. So they spaced these singles out quite a few months because Freakazoid, as we get into later, it was around August, September is when it really started to take off. And you see that the album sales kind of go up. And I think in August, they were really trying to take advantage of it, and they put out that second single. And then the third single came out the following year in February 13th, 1984. That was the video came out for that. But the actual single came out January 28th, 1984. And that video for No Parking on the Dance Floor was filmed in LA on location. So this single didn't do as well. It was number 81 in the US, number 43 US R&B, and then number 44 US dance. So this song, even though it didn't do well, it was a huge hit with DJs, and it was a huge hit when when people would go to clubs and it would basically pack the floor of this song, even though it didn't necessarily do as well on the charts. And even that this song today, I think that No Parking on the Dance Floor is a lot more popular today than some of the other songs, even Freakazoid. You hear that a lot more often in 2024 than Freakazoid or Wet My Whistle or any of these other songs. So that kind of shows you that charts don't always matter. Sometimes it's about the music, right? So I'm going to give you a little bit of a background on Midnight Star. So Midnight Star was formed in 1976 at Kentucky State University by Reggie Calloway and his brother Vincent. Reggie played trumpets and Vincent played trombone. And then it was also with Belinda Lipscomb. She was a vocalist. By the time of this album, they basically expanded to a 9-piece group. Bobby Lovelace was kind of the one that was added right before this album. He had previously played with Cameo and a few other bands as well too, but he was a pretty well-known drummer. In 1983, Reggie, when talking about the formation of the band, said, "We started on the campus of Kentucky State University. We tried to rehearse in a classroom at the music department, but they didn't go for that. So we had to move the equipment to my dorm room. We'd sneak Belinda Lipscomb in, our female vocalist, into a building where girls weren't allowed, then try to sing and play our horns so softly that the authorities would think someone was just trying to listen to a transistor radio. Finally, the dorm director let us use the basement. It was fantastic. I could sleep in my room again. That's what Reggie said back in 1983 about the formation of the band. They ended up eventually quitting school together to focus on Midnight Star and spent 4 years living together in the Cincinnati home of Reggie and Vincent Calloway's mother, and suffered through some dark times, like an ill-fated trip to New York, a shot at fame and fortune where some of the band's equipment was stolen. They ended up breaking the top 40 R&B charts in 1981 with the song I've Been Watching You, and in 1982 released the top 30 single Hotspot. So they'd already had a couple songs already in the kind of top charts, the top 40, I guess you could say, and they were looking to capitalize on that. And I know with the 1982 album Victory, they weren't too happy with the results of that. So this album was kind of a change in that way as well too, to fix some of the issues that they had with that specific album. This was kind of Midnight Star's second attempt at producing its own album. That first album I was talking about, Victory, had been produced by the entire group with Reggie Calloway. And then this specific album is Reggie Calloway by himself. And he found that that was really important to keep that to himself and be the kind of the one to make the decisions instead of having 9 people make the decisions. It was a 9-piece group, so there were a lot of different personalities and different mindsets between all of them. All the songs ended up being written by members of the group. With Victory, Reggie tried to appease everyone and gave in to points he felt were wrong. The results of that album also indicated turmoil and indecision. Victory is probably the band's worst album because of that. After Victory flopped, Reggie Calloway took over and used his leverage as leader and founder. This is what he had to say in an interview with LA Times in September of 1984. This was with Dennis Hunt, was the interviewer. There were too many cooks and they ruined the soup. I learned a lot about producing from experts like Leon Silvers and Quincy Jones. I had to assert myself. I took charge and said things are going to be done this way. I wasn't a Hitler. I tried to be fair. I was real scared, but I did the job. I made decisions for the good of the music. Some feelings got hurt, but you can't avoid that in a group this size. No Parking was a homegrown project from start to finish. It was recorded and mixed at Counterpart Creative Studios, deep in the heart of Cheviot and Fifth Floor Recording. The engineer for this project was the city's wizard of the mixing board, Rick Probst. In 1983, the band was running school assemblies and workshops for semi-pro musicians in their hometown, Cincinnati, Ohio. Reggie Calloway added at the time, "One of Midnight Star's main messages in its workshops is the importance of education to getting ahead in music." But Watson, another member of Midnight Star, added at the time, "I went to college to further my career. I wanted to be able to read and write music, copyright it, and deal with producers, arrangers, and record companies. You have to have the determination to go beyond where you are." Watson advised music and business courses for aspiring musicians and encouraged students to seek further advice from counselors and music teachers. Bobby Lovelace, who had previously been a drummer for both Cameo and Mantra, in an interview with Sandy Okamoto of the Columbus Ledger, also noted that you have to check yourself. You have to be willing to make sacrifices to gain success. You have to have faith in yourself and what you're doing. You have to hang in there. You need to get exposure. You have to keep good company. You have to be associated with professionals in the business. You have to hang around the right people in the business, and you have to have adequate representation. Calloway described the band's live shows in comparison to the record in an interview with Richard Haag of the Charlotte News in August 1983 by saying, "On stage, we're a real high-energy, fun, exciting act. To put that on a record a lot of times is real hard. But that was one of our main objectives, to put that spirit from the show on the record, and people can pick it up." Calloway believed that the members' shared belief in God was holding the band together at the time, stating to Richard Hagg, "We usually have prayers before going on stage or long trips. It's an opportunity to release any tension we might have." Billboard magazine took notice of the band around this time and noted that they project a fresh passion and funk rock fusion that generates hit excitement, direct and meaningful. Midnight Star's sound is crisp, lean, and infectious. In an interview with Dan Murray of the Mesquite News in November 1983, Bo Watson listed Earth, Wind and Fire, Chicago, and the Commodores as major influences on the sound of Midnight Star. As we mentioned before, the success of the single Freakazoid pushed the LP over the platinum mark. Electricity was an album cut that was getting played quite a bit in clubs at this time, even though it was never released as a single. When recording Freakazoid, Reggie Calloway explains, "There was a lot of feeling because of where the whole country was at the time, what was happening, and I had a beat that was undeniable and irresistible. Just the word Freakazoid. It was such a ring on your tongue, and everybody we wanted to know, what's a Freakazoid? It really is a type of hook that draws people into it." By the end of August 1983, No Parking was one of the best-selling albums in stock. Alex Bowens, manager of Happy Music on Warwick Boulevard, told Tonya Lee of the Daily Press that the album had taken the place of Michael Jackson's Thriller as the most requested album. Reggie Calloway mentions to the LA Times in September 1984, "Even after the album came out, we weren't sure what would happen. We knew it was good, but that doesn't mean anything. The album could have died like the others, but Freakazoid caught on. That saved it." Around this time, Midnight Star Music Incorporated, the group's corporation, also began producing an album by The Deal, a group Midnight Star introduced to Solar Records. The Deal was from Cincinnati and had included future music stars Babyface and L.A. Reid. This is kind of an interesting quote I found from the Jersey Journal. This was what one of the writers had to say. This was September 14th, 1984. I think this is a very valid point that he said that a lot of critics will say about Midnight Star. "Part of the problem is the group has no distinctive star or personality, no style that's exclusively theirs. Some critics consider Midnight Star more lucky than talented, contending that the band stumbled onto a hit single, Freakazoid, which caused album sales to snowball." So I think that's a very valid quote from the Jersey Journal that a lot of critics were feeling at the time. It might not be necessarily true, but I could see how they would feel that way with so many members in the group. Reggie Calloway promised for the follow-up album that they'd only deal with hit songs and that they'd all be varied and each one will stand on its own. "We have a good 10 years left in us, and we've set up our business so that we'll be involved in music for years after that. We're just going to continue carrying fans into the world of music." And that was from Record Searchlight, March 1984, that specific quote. So now I'm going to go through my specific review of how I feel about this album. I recently picked this up a few months back, and I was really interested after hearing recently on the BBC, No Parking on the Dance Floor, after many years. I was interested in picking up this album, so it went on my want list, and I eventually found it for super cheap, actually, and in pretty good condition. It's not bad. So I'm actually going to show you the record. This is the Solar record. This is the Canadian pressing. Pretty cool label on these on the Solar label. So then the first song is Electricity. So we're kind of introduced to the vibe of this album by Vincent Calloway and the Roland SVC 350 vocoder and the Oberheim DMX drum machine in full throttle before a big blast of multi-track synths playing pitch bends up and down. A juicy synth bass, played most likely on a mini Moog or a Moog Source depending on who you ask, establishes the groove, and we get into the hypnotic verses where lines are sang through a vocoder such as, "I've got the power to energize, I've got the power to magnetize." The whole vibe makes you want to dance. I can see why the song was played in clubs back in 1983. I'm sure it packed a lot of floors back then. Belinda's vocals stick out on this track, and the second part of the verses and her ad-libs. I believe that she is their secret weapon. She kind of differentiates this band from other male R&B bands of the time. And her voice is a lot of the reason why this album does work. Towards the end of this song, there is a sharp sequence synth along with a percussive vocal. It's kind of interesting. It's fed through a delay effect on the Eventide harmonizer where it delays it, but then it bends it up and down the sound, which you can tell when you hear the song. You can tell where they muted it in and out. It's kind of brought in and out of the song, which kind of gives it a really interesting groove. Then we go on to the second track on side one, which is Night Rider. I would say after listening to this album quite a few times, this track is probably my favorite track. The bass line and structure of this track, I noticed it like within the first time I heard it, are very similar to Billie Jean, which came out the same year by Michael Jackson. Funky resonant synth stabs that run through the song are reminiscent of some of David Frank's work with the system, and are pure ear candy along with the strong brute vocals in certain spots. There's a tight staccato guitar kind of alternating between single lines, octaves, and chords. And also, this is kind of the first track on the album where that kind of makes its entrance, because Electricity was just basically just synths and drum machine. This is where you have a real instrument actually entering on the album. The lyrics kind of emphasize the darkness of the Night Rider character that is narrating this song, and chart an evening recurring engagement between the narrator and a woman with words such as, "The tiredness of a broken heart casts a shadow on you. I ride the night like a black stallion baby. I'll be bearing the torch to ignite your flames. And the night has dealt you a dirty hand. I ain't gonna let you sleep." This one has Melvin Gentry as the lead vocalist on this song. I think he did a really great job on this song, because this is probably, like I said, my favorite track on the album. Then we go to track 3, Feels So Good. This is the first of the two Belinda Lipscomb leads on this album. So it does have a different sound on it, more of a laid back groove on this one, but not entirely a slow jam, which we'll get to later in the disc. The Let Me Hear You Say Oh chorus, alternating with the background vocals, is very catchy. You find yourself kind of humming it and singing it in your head when hearing it a few times. That being said, this is probably one of the lesser tracks on the album as far as I'm concerned. There is a real bass on this track too, versus the synth bass that permeates most of the album. There's also a section where horns kind of make their appearance, just very sparingly, and just kind of for a little punch in one section, which you really have to listen for. Then the last track on side one is Wet My Whistle. This was kind of the second single that was put out. Percolating percussion along with Simmons drums or AMS triggered drums. They do sound different on this track. A single muted line guitar and a chorus Fender Rhodes electric piano drive this track along. A very resonant multi-tracked synth, which sounds like the synth equivalent of water to me, answers to the Wet My Whistle lyric, which is very inventive and a fun way of relating the lyrics to the backing track. I find that this track sounds very similar to their later track, Midas Touch. It could be because Bo Watson also sings the lead vocals on both songs, but it does have that similar vibe, and I think this was like their first attempt at doing Midas Touch, this song. Although Midas Touch is a little bit of a better song in my opinion, but this song is pretty good. It's a decent song. Then we go to side 2, No Parking on the Dance Floor. This is the highlight of the album as far as I'm concerned. It's a really funky track. No wonder this song was popular with DJs back then. It has a very hypnotic groove and is a little bit Prince influenced. I also hear Commodores as well there. The vocoder ranters in the album here. The guitar and bass work here are extremely tight. It is real bass on this song. The lyrics describe moving one's body to the beat, and that no parking, no standing still basically, is allowed on the dance floor. Lyrics such as "shake it up and shake it on down, let me feel you moving, you gotta get down" exemplify this. I'm confused by the chart numbers on this, though. Like as I mentioned before, this is probably the track you hear the most these days from this album, even over Freakazoid, which charted higher. This has a Melvin Gentry lead vocal. Now we go into the big hit of this album, Freakazoid. This is the song that launched the album and Midnight Star into a higher consciousness in North America. A vocoded Vincent Calloway proclaims in the intro, "Freakazoid's robots, please report to the dance floor." This song is very electronic and is entirely driven by the Oberheim DMX drum machine and various sequenced synthesizers. There are some cool effects in this song, such as someone in the band saying freak in the middle, and an eighth note delay bounces it in time with the tempo of the song. This specific section too also has rototoms, which is probably one of the only human instruments on this track apart from the vocals. I think that the vocals really bring the track to life for me. Without the vocals, this track would have been pretty dead sounding because it is very electronic. And I think this track is also more pop than funk, in my opinion. Yes, it doesn't have a real funky beat. To be honest, it's more of a pop thing. And then in the specific song, we have Belinda Lipscomb, Reggie Calloway, Melvin Gentry, and Vincent Calloway on lead vocals at various points of the song. So now we get to the slow jam. This is the third track on the second side. This track was one of the early songs. It's co-written with Kenny Babyface Edmonds, who later became very popular in the late 80s, early 90s, even into the late 90s, doing his own producing eventually. It sounds like Babyface has found his sound very early on, as this sounds very reminiscent of his later ballads. I'm thinking of stuff on like Tender Lover from 1989. It sounds very similar. Real bass and drums lay down the groove on this one, along with a chorus Fender Rhodes providing the chordal backing. Soft guitar strums and single lines, high string synth glue it all together. Belinda Lipscomb and Bo Watson's emotive vocals share the sweetness in this one. Now we're on to the final track of side 2. It's called Playmates. This is kind of a live back and forth percussion pattern, and a single kick drum open this track along with a very dry sawtooth wave synth. This track also has a very generic funk lead fifth sound, which blasts out of the right speakers. That specific sound. I find that it's very generic. It's in so many songs of this period. It's obvious that this track is influenced by Prince with his provocative lyrics. The song seems kind of rattled off and is weaker than the rest of the tracks in my opinion. It seems they replaced the original DMX snare drum with another drum sample off an AMS or something of that ilk. The snare drum sounds different on this track than the rest, and it's pretty generic, cheesy sample in my opinion that they used. Belinda tries to save the song with her wonderful voice, but in my opinion it's too generic sounding. It's not my favorite track. This is probably my least favorite track on the album. It's kind of fitting too that they put this on the very end of the album, kind of tacked on. I feel like they just kind of rattled this off the last minute to create filler.